Hey, indie filmmakers, I'm Nick Bodmer.
I'm Griffin Hammond, and on this week's episode, we are talking about how to set white balance.
Plus, we get a medical prescription for voiceover, and your questions about finding clients in your small town, which drone to buy, and if you really need an external recorder.
Hello, Nick.
Hello, Griffin. How are you, sir?
I'm good. We talked about white balance a little bit on our last episode.
Yeah, did we get it all wrong?
No, we got it right. I think I was talking about how I like to set the Kelvin on my camera, and you like to use auto white balance.
I like to be lazy. It's not that I like to use auto white balance. It's just that I use auto white balance. If that difference makes sense.
Yeah, is that it works for you? Yeah,
it does. But I have manually set my white balance so you won't yell at me anymore.
Oh, wonderful. So today we got several questions as follow-up from last episode. A lot of people had questions about white balance. So
Cool.
We're going to start today right away with 4 questions about white balance. And
right into it. Into the questions.
We will share exactly what we're doing. We'll talk about your settings that you have right now, Nick.
Okay, very good.
So let's start with the first email that we got from Yannick, who wants to say, first of all, that he loves the podcast. He says we put out great content and that our podcast is his favorite. Thank you, Yannick.
Well, thank you. That's very nice.
He mentions that we talked about auto white balance and that we said that the AWB, the auto white balance setting, would shift over time. And he says he always assumed the AWB selected an automatic white balance at the beginning of a shot but locked it in. And he hasn't been able to find much information about that. And he says he hasn't had much trouble shooting with auto white balance, that it's worked for him. So what do you think it does?
Well, I mean, I think that's easy enough to test, right? You could go inside and start rolling and then step outside, and you'll know right away if white balance changes or not. And I think I'm pretty sure that it does change on the fly. I know that's kind of what you complained about with my auto white balance usage. So
right, I was pretty sure
guessing
that
it's camera dependent, but
yeah, I was pretty sure that yours had shifted because it's hard to notice though. But when we have a 45-minute podcast episode and I skim through the whole thing, I could see some changes. So I knew that's what was happening. But it's interesting, and I had to test it myself because it's different than like an iPhone. You know how the iPhone white balance is. It's like
it changes all the time.
Yeah, like you notice it immediately.
Fast. Yeah.
Yeah, you walk outside and boom, it's different, which is good for most things. I also noticed that with the GH5 and probably with all these Panasonic cameras, once you hit record, it will change instantly. It'll pick a new white balance right away. But to Yannick's question, I did some tests. I started recording and I moved my camera from my monitor, which is very blue, and it had white balance for the monitor. It turned it white. Then I turned it over to my wall, which is kind of cream colored and under incandescent yellow lighting. It took maybe 10 seconds, but it very slowly changed. I guess they figure you don't want dramatic, noticeable changes.
That makes sense.
Yeah, so it's kind of nice that it is a gradual change, but I still don't love relying on it because I know it's not going to be consistent over time.
Yep.
So you don't have auto white balance set right now?
I do not. I went ahead and I manually adjusted the white balance to what I hope is an appropriate level. And you can tell me next week how close I got to what you would prefer.
Well,
I don't know if maybe it's a little too yellow. I don't have the best lighting is the biggest problem.
Last week, yours was pretty close to what I would like, and it was maybe a little bit too yellow. And even, I'm not sure, in some spaces you get a little bit more of a green tint or magenta tint. Yours was a little bit more green. So I actually just pushed the green away a little bit, pushed down the green in the midtones, and I think I pushed up the blue a little bit in the midtones. And that seemed
and then I just popped. I was beautiful.
It was perfect, yeah. But I also think that, like, there never is a right white balance. I think that your room probably is a little bit kind of cream colored, and
I've got creamy walls. I'm using compact fluorescent bulbs. It's a little yellow.
So even if we get it like technically correct, like it looks the same in the camera as it does to your eye, it might be that your room kind of has a yellow tone anyway, and so I feel like I can make it look a little more interesting by making it more blue.
Well, that brings up a good question. We have a YouTube comment from Rhett Brown at RetroRec. He says, you mentioned setting Kelvin. What is your process for setting your white balance for a shot that is not using auto indoor or outdoor settings? So talk us through what you do.
Yeah. Well, I can actually show you right now. For anyone who's watching, let me start recording my screen. And
Griffin's getting fancy today.
I'll talk you through my settings on the GH5, but this is the same as all the Panasonic cameras I've used over the years. Although I think one thing that was nice with the last camera is they actually enabled the ability to change the white balance while you're recording, which you couldn't always do.
But I don't know if I can.
Today,
on the G85.
Today I have just dialed in my Kelvin, which is something I like to do, and I have it set to 5400. So let me, I can set this for you, and I guess you can't. Oh yeah, you can see it on the screen here. So I could push it all the way up to. I've pushed it up to 8200 Kelvin right now, which means that the camera is expecting very blue light. So the consequence is that I have turned very orange.
Okay.
And I can dial this all the way down to. Let's see. Let's go
so
down
a higher Kelvin number would be for more blue light, outdoorsy type situation.
Right. In fact, on the Panasonic camera, it shows you little icons along this scale. There's like in the shade, clouds, sun, all the way down to incandescent light and candles.
Ooh. A little romantic candlelight.
Yeah.
Oh, baby. Show me that low Kelvin.
So this is how I like to set Kelvin. I like to set my white balance just by dialing in a Kelvin. And one thing I like about this is that you can just kind of see which one is going to work best for you. And what I like is that you can just kind of subjectively decide what's going to work best for the shot. Because here's where it gets kind of weird. I'm at 5400 Kelvin on my white balance setting. So what do you think my lighting is set to?
I feel like this is a trick question. I was going to say 5400 Kelvin, but why am I wrong?
You should say that, but I'm walking you into a trap.
Yeah, I feel it. I feel it.
Well, so if I look up at my LED lights, there's one pointed at me and there's one behind me, and they're both set to about 4300, I think. Let's see. Yeah, 4400 on the one behind me and 4300 on the one that's pointing at my face.
Is it wall bounce?
No, it's pointing right at me. But for those who are watching, let me real quick drop down to 4300. Let me match this this shot, this light in front of me. And now the light on my face looks perfectly white. I guess technically it's correct, but to me it just looks really bland and cold. And my face is so pale that I usually find that when I'm color correcting shots of myself, I want them to be warmer and more amber and red.
Okay.
So this is an example of me taking into account what lighting I have, but then just deciding white balance is a tool I have to make a subjective decision about what I want the shot to feel like. And I don't mind that my walls become a little bit more yellow than they are in reality if it makes the brick behind me really pop and if it makes my face look more human. I just think it looks better this way.
So you're saying there's some art to this?
Yeah. I think, let me show you another way that you could set white balance. You can also do, of course, we can do all the presets. So I could do auto white balance here, which is choosing something that looks pretty true to life, but I look a little pale and blue. I can go to sunlight, which actually looks pretty good for these conditions. All of my indoor incandescent light looks really blue. I would never use that right now. But what I could do is I could point like a white piece of paper at the camera and tell it what custom white balance is. And I've actually done that here on this shot, and it's given me that kind of cold blue look. So the same as you setting it to the exact Kelvin that your lights are set to. Right. So the camera has figured out what my lights are, and it's doing it correctly, but I still am not always happy with a custom white balance. It's not always what I'm going for in a shot, so sometimes I'll just dial it in myself. Now, you said you used a white piece of paper, but there are tools you can use for that, right? Like a gray card or something like that? Yeah, in fact, I used to have a white balance card, and it was a gray card on one side, white on the other, and I don't know where I lost it or something.
Why would you use gray or white? What determines that?
I'm not exactly sure, actually, but I know that you do have to be a little bit careful with white, just because it's, some pieces of paper might be more like cream colored, or, I think white can vary. Mm-hmm. But I don't know. I do find that a lot of times I can just point at something that's pretty close to white, a wall or a piece of paper, and it's a good starting point to see if I like what's going on.
Okay.
So our next question comes from Willie Payton, who is wondering, when adjusting Kelvin, are you eyeballing it, or are you using a device to tell you how many kelvins to use?
Well, there are such things as light meters that will give you that kind of... Will they give you color temperature or light meter, or is it just intensity for exposure?
Yeah, I think you can get color temperature on light meters.
But you obviously do not do that. We just discussed you're eyeballing it and kind of making an artistic choice.
Right. So yeah, I oftentimes start with the presets on the camera. If I'm outside, I'll try the sunlight setting or the cloudy setting, depending on the situation. And usually that gets me to a place that I'm happy with. But sometimes if it's summertime in the mountains and I want to feel the warmth, I do want it to be a little bit more yellow. So that's when sometimes I'm not happy with the preset and I'll jump into Kelvin. And I kind of have memorized Kelvin, so I know that if sun is coming through a window, it's probably somewhere around 5,000 Kelvin. I know that if I'm outside, it could be like 6,500. It could be even higher. In fact, I think it got higher when I was in the mountains, up higher in the air. I don't know why.
Less scattering and diffusion, maybe.
Yeah.
I don't know.
And I know that incandescent lighting is usually around like 3,500. So I can kind of jump there real quick, and then just play with it a little bit to get it exactly where I want it. And what I often do to make sure that I'm not going crazy is I'll kind of look back and forth between the LCD and the environment and make sure, is the white thing that I'm seeing in the shot in the distance rendering similar to what I'm seeing on the LCD? And if I'm seeing this thing in the world is actually pretty yellow and it's showing up as white on my screen, that's probably a problem. Willie Payton also has a follow-up question. He's wondering how you incorporate bicolor LED lights into an environment where you need light, and how do you set the kelvins of the light?
Yeah, that's a tough one, because the lighting conditions can change pretty dramatically, right? Have you done much of that?
Well, yeah, I think the important thing usually is to not mix color temperatures. That's usually where you get into trouble. I think you can dial your camera into whatever, and if it's matching your lighting generally, then everything will be happy. But what I think the problem that people run into is that they set their Kelvin to maybe their lighting that they brought in, but then there's other lighting in the room. So usually I turn off the existing lighting and use only my lighting if I'm bringing in my own. And what I like about bicolor LEDs, what he's talking about is, like, I have these Westcott flex lights, and half the LEDs are amber and half the LEDs are very blue, and they work together. So when I set the color temperature to 4,300 Kelvin, what it's doing is it's just showing like a little bit of each to mix together and get a pretty down the middle color. What I like to do is, if I'm shooting next to a window, I like to use natural light if I can. I know that the light coming in the window is probably in the 5,500 range. So I might dial in the lights to 5,500 and let them be more blue than I might otherwise. And hopefully that matches pretty well. But I think you'll notice it right away if you dial in the white balance on your camera and you have your actor next to a window and you're also lighting with an LED. I think you would notice in the camera pretty quickly if you're getting two different shades on the face, and you can adjust from there. Would you like to read our final white balance question?
If I had the right tab open on my browser, which I do now. We have an email from Austin who says, I've always struggled finding a good white balance at stage plays or concerts while recording. Even if they're using tungsten or LEDs, the colors change so much. Sometimes it'll look amazing, and sometimes it'll look totally off. Any solutions?
So this was something, I'm sure I have experience with it. I've definitely done this, but it confused me a little bit off the bat. I couldn't remember what color temperature stage lighting is generally. I don't know, is that something you talked about in school when you studied theater?
I'm sure we did. Most stage lights are going to be tungsten bulbs, which I think are probably in the 3,000 Kelvin range, which is pretty on the yellow side. Is that accurate?
Oh yeah, the tungsten lighting is more yellow.
Yeah, 3,000 to 3,200. The problem is, obviously, so many of those lights are gelled, right? So you're going to be getting, if you're trying to set a white balance, you're going to be getting some, it's going to be difficult to pull a reading if, kind of the default stage lighting is usually something we call bastard amber, which is an actual color of gel, and that's going to skew it even more orange than you might expect. So I would try dialing in somewhere around the 3,000 to 3,500 range manually, and then hopefully you're getting the effect of color that the lighting designer intended you to see.
Yeah, I think that has been my experience, that most of the times when I'm doing indoor stage events, if I just go right to the incandescent bulb preset, it's usually pretty close.
Yep, but you are going to get some crazy colors because they're throwing crazy colors on the stage, most likely.
Right, they may do a whole scene where everything's red, and that's what they intended. So this is an example of where you wouldn't want auto white balance, because if everything on the stage turns red, your camera over time will decide, I'm going to make all that stuff look white.
Right. Another common thing they do in stage is they'll have opposite colors from either side to add some shape and definition and depth to actors' faces. So you might have a cool blue from one side and a warm from the other, and that adds some shadow and depth to the face, which could be messing with you a little bit too.
Yeah. I have noticed that sometimes I've done stage events where, maybe these are generally outdoor stage events, and there have been times when it does seem like the colors are calibrated for a sunlight kind of white balance. And I don't know if that's just because they want it to look natural outside or something, but I usually find that if I can just try those two presets. They're so dramatically different, tungsten light or incandescent light and sunlight, that if I just check those two presets, chances are one of them will be right.
Clearly correct.
Yeah, you'll know which one is right. So stick with that one. One last thing I want to talk about with white balance, and it reminds me of it because we were just talking about the all red scene in a theater production, is, do you remember my trick that I call evil white balance?
Yeah, that's in your great tutorial video on how to take a screenshot in the Mac, right?
Yes, I used it in that. Yeah, I forgot about that. I did an Indie Mogul tutorial on evil white balance years ago, and then also incorporated it into one of my most popular videos, which is how to take a Mac screenshot.
It kind of comes out of nowhere in that nice tutorial,
yeah. which
is still funny.
Because one thing I want to point out is that when you're doing custom white balance, you can also tell the camera that anything is white. It doesn't have to be something that's white or slightly off-white. So I think one of my presets that I have loaded in here is I took a purple gel and put it up to my camera and told it that that's what white is. And now this is what I look like. I'm completely bathed in green right now. The opposite
Tricky
of
guy,
purple.
you. So because it says purple is white, it kind of inverts the colors.
Right. And I think that if I take this purple gel that I have right now and I put this on my LED, I might need to pull the light in pretty close to me. I should start to look relatively normal in this strange lighting environment. But it's one way to make me look kind of normal and make my background look crazy green. This looks really cool for Halloween.
So actually that brings up an interesting question for me, and maybe you can... So when you said white balance, it's not just a Kelvin adjustment. It's not just a color temperature. There's a whole color spectrum that's involved somehow too then. Is that accurate?
Yes. In fact, let me show you. I I can adjust the settings of this Kelvin. So I can dial in the Kelvin, which is pretty much changing the blue and yellow of the shot. But I can also adjust it and change. I can add more green to the shot. I can add more magenta to the shot. I could add more amber or blue. So yeah, you can make several adjustments.
Interesting. Okay. I've never messed with that part of setting white balance, because I use auto white balance like a normal human being.
Yeah. Well, and it's doing all those things. It's making all those choices for you.
Interesting. And I assume when you do use a white balance card, it's doing the same thing.
Yeah. It's taking a look at the card and doing everything it can to make sure that thing is white. Well, in just a moment, we will answer your questions about finding clients in your small town, which drone to buy, and if you really need an external recorder. And before we talk about our sponsor, I do just want to give a shout out to my friend John Luna, who has been helping me on several video projects over the last few weeks. You've
Thanks,
met John over the phone.
I've met John on the phone. Yes, that's right.
And he's been helping me edit this podcast, and he's been doing a little bit of scripting for us. And also, he helped me shoot and edit the video that I released on Friday, which is a review of the SpiderLight holster.
Very cool. Well, thanks, John. Hey Filmmakers is brought to you by Tongle, the creative network where anyone anywhere has the opportunity to make content for brands and get paid.
Now through the end of the year, Tongle is hosting a project to build out their YouTube channel. You've heard about this. It's called the YouTube Pilot Portal, and it's an opportunity for you to develop some content that could live on the Tongle YouTube channel, and you'll get paid for it. So just like all the projects on Tongle, there is a brief right now online that you can check out, and you can submit to it. And it's really open to any sort of ideas that filmmakers would like to watch. So it could be a series of tutorial content, any ideas that you have for reaching a filmmaker audience that might fit really well on the YouTube channel for Tongle. So you should pitch it, and you could receive an offer for them to purchase your content. So I encourage you to check it out.
Get all the details by visiting tongle.com/projects. That's TONGAL.com/projects. Thank you, Tongle.
Hey, before we answer more questions, I want to play a clip from. We got a message from a doctor.
Greetings, Griffin and Nick. This is Dr. Mark Vaughan of the Auburn Medical Group and the YouTube channel by the same name. I wanted to comment on something that I heard on the podcast today.
So did you ever think that we'd get a message from a doctor on this show?
Yeah, the reach of the podcast is starting to impress me, Griffin. That's very cool.
So he was responding to our episode where we talked about voiceover. We got a question from someone who was saying they had a really gravelly voice. And this is what he thinks is the problem.
Oftentimes, the gravelly voice is coming from an accumulation of mucus on the vocal cords. If people have an overproduction of acid in the stomach, they will have a hypersecretion of mucus.
An accumulation of mucus.
Well, the medical professionals have weighed in.
Try some simple maneuvers to see if they can fix it. Decreasing fat in the diet, decreasing caffeine, decreasing alcohol, spicy foods, more so in the later part of the day, and have smaller meals at night and eat earlier in the day. And then the other thing that we'll often do is have people use over-the-counter medicines that help decrease the production of acid. If you do that for 6 weeks, usually that's going to allow whatever problem was letting the acid come up totally heal over in the esophagus and stomach.
And I will point out that he's not diagnosing, because doctors can't do that blanket to everyone. You may have different issues, so if you continue to have these problems, you should see your own doctor. But
speak to your medical professional, who is not Griffin Hammond, just so we're clear.
Right.
You are not licensed to practice medicine in any state, as far as I know.
No. Am I licensed to practice filmmaking advice?
I better hope so. We're in big trouble.
The DIY filmmaking advice commission is going to come after us. So one question that I've gotten a lot of in this last week, and I won't even I can't even say from whom, because I keep getting this same question from a lot of different people, is just after last week's episode where we talked about the GH5 version 2.0 firmware, people were wondering if they could still use my same settings file for that.
Dun, dun, dun. Can they?
Yeah, I actually just tested it out myself. I was pretty sure you could, but yes, I loaded the new firmware and I was able to load on my new settings. So people were wondering if I should release new settings, but I don't think I need to, because actually, as I talked about last week, many of the new features on the GH5 version 2.0 software are not even features that I need. So I will continue to use the camera mostly the way that it arrived earlier in the year, and I can flip on those new features when I need to.
All right, we've got a YouTube comment from Alex Ronsley. Griffin, do you have a recommendation for a camera body lens combo that totals about $1,500? I shoot interviews and basic sport B-rolls for a team here in British Columbia, Canada. I also shoot real estate videos and photos, looking for something to tackle a few of these with the ability to add to the package later. He's currently looking at the Canon 7070. Is that a typo?
I don't know. I don't know the Canon lineup very well.
I don't either, but I'm not used to seeing a second digit.
Yeah.
I would think 70 or 70D, but I could be wrong. You know what's going to solve that for me? A little Google
right now.
70D. Nope, that looks like a real camera. I don't know what I'm talking about. It is a real camera. So you should definitely listen to my advice on it, since I have never even heard of it.
I'm going to revoke your filmmaking advice license.
Dang.
The first thing that strikes me about this question is that sports B-roll and real estate are such different, very different...
opposite ends of the spectrum.
Yeah, different focal length needs. So I'm wondering if there's one lens that can do both. Depends on how tight he needs to get for...
One lens to rule them all.
Yeah. But definitely for real estate, he's going to want as wide angle as possible. Maybe not crazy fisheye, but the wider the better for shooting large spaces and showing them off. At first...
And for sports, you want a major zoom.
Right.
So you really need two lenses. I mean, I'm going to say it. You gotta buy two lenses for these two different things.
But I do think that a camera like yours, the G85, what does that retail for? $1,000?
$1,000 with a kit lens.
Right. That comes with the 12 to 60 lens.
Mm-hmm.
So
12 to 30. Yes, 12 to 60.
Yeah.
You're correct.
So for less than his budget, he could get a camera and a lens. That lens would be a perfect real estate lens. I think 12 millimeters would be the right.
12 millimeter, yeah. I mean, you could go a little wider if you were really spending money, but I think 12 millimeters will work quite well.
Yeah, I think you'd be pretty happy with that. I mean, I used to shoot real estate with 14 millimeters, and I probably could have gone wider. But
I think I did it with, I guess 14 was as wide as I could get.
Yeah.
So.
And maybe
but
depending
it did feel
on,
a little constrained at 14.
Yeah. I think I've always really liked that 12 angle because it doesn't look unnatural, but it's just a little bit distorted wide. It's a nice lens for shooting establishing shots in spaces. And depending on the sports footage he needs, 60 might be able to get it. If he's not talking about tight close-ups of players, if he's just talking about I need to get games and run up close to people, I think that could do well too.
For me, though, I think in general for most sports coverage, you're going to want to be able to get a lot tighter than that.
Right. I told him, I think I mentioned on YouTube the 14 to 140 millimeter lens.
Yeah.
That might be a lens that could get everything he needs. It's just a little bit darker. It's going to be about twice. It's going to be half as much light as the other
Which
lens.
for sports is fine, right? Because you're generally outdoors in the sun, so that's going to work just fine. You don't want a razor thin aperture either because you're trying to keep a little bit more in focus usually too.
Yeah. So here's a YouTube comment we got from TJ Basinger. He is a full-time videographer and content producer and looking to purchase a drone for personal and commercial use. Only has experience flying the, not even camera drones, but just the toy drones, and feels pretty confident about controlling those. Wondering if he should get the Mavic for its price point, that's at $1,000, or the DJI Phantom 4 Pro, which is at $1,500. And he's just worried about spending a little bit more because he could crash the thing. But he's also worried about buying the cheaper one and then thinking he'll have to upgrade later. Do you know anything about those two drones?
I don't know the Phantom 4 Pro very well. I can tell you with the results that I've gotten out of the Spark, I feel like the Mavic is probably a really great drone and a good entry level. However, if this is a professional tool you're going to be using to make money, spending an extra $500 does not seem unreasonable to me, to make sure you have some of those more advanced features.
Right.
Flight time being the biggest one. My guess is the Phantom 4 Pro is going to have a lot better flight time. Let me look that up.
I think I saw the Phantom 4 Pro has like a 30-minute flight time. I actually don't know how that compares to the Mavic. But I asked my friend Matt Edwards. You know Matt Edwards?
He's kind of our go-to drone enthusiast, isn't he?
Yeah, because I just, I can look up the specs, but of course I want to go to him and see, like, why would someone want the Pro, especially if it's only $500 more, like, could it really offer that much more? But he says the big thing about the Pro is the size of the sensor, that you're going to get a bigger sensor on the Phantom 4 Pro than you would on the Mavic. So, and he kind of says what I was already thinking, that what I've seen from the Mavic and the Spark, they look about the same. Of course, the Mavic is 4K and the Spark is 1080, but the image kind of looks the same off of both cameras to me. So I think if you really want like an improvement in image quality from the Spark and the Mavic, then that's why you would jump up to the Phantom 4 Pro. But
another quick thing I'm seeing as I do just a brief bit of research is the Phantom 4 Pro is significantly bigger. It doesn't fold up, obviously.
Right, that's
but
one thing
that
to
is
consider.
going to translate into much better wind resistance, right? So if you've got, a chute and it's a little bit windier than you might like, but, the chute must go on because you have a paying client, having that bigger drone might be an advantage. It's going to be able to handle more wind as opposed to you just saying, can't fly my drone, it's too windy.
Here's a YouTube comment we
Now
got from...
let me, real quick, before we jump into that, when you're shooting commercially with drones, there are some regulations and licensing needed, so definitely make sure you research, what's needed to use a drone commercially before you invest all that money.
Right. Here's a YouTube comment we got from Vincent Barnard, who lives in a small town of 12,000 people, where he says that the newspaper and radio are at the top of the advertising food chain, and he's wondering how to convince businesses that they need video content. Should he focus on selling commercial spots or teach them about why social media videos are important? He just wants to figure out how to get clients.
Yeah, it's tough. I don't think that newspaper and radio are going to be at the top of the food chain for much longer. I don't think that's true in most places, and maybe in some of these smaller towns it's just a little slower to come around. But
well, it depends on if you want to reach more than those 12,000 people. If your goal is only to reach that town, then the newspaper and radio could be great. But if you have a business that is online or selling things, then surely you need to reach a larger audience.
And, with Snapchat and Instagram and Facebook, all of these are places where local businesses are, starting to try and reach their local customers, and they usually have that targeting ability too. So, it might be good to just find one business that's maybe a little ahead of the curve, and you can show people what you can do.
Yeah, if you can... I wouldn't necessarily focus on selling commercial spots. I wouldn't focus on like promoting yourself broadly to everyone. I think if you can crack like one business owner and make great videos for that business, I think that word of mouth could lead to a lot of other clients in your town. And I remember this thing that I learned in school about television broadcasting or television commercials, that one of the greatest selling points, one of the best ways to sell people on television commercials is to get them in the commercials. And it doesn't always make for the best commercial, but this is why you see local commercials always have the store owners in the commercial. They're not the best actors, but they love being on camera because they will get such great feedback from everyone who sees them. People that watch the video, see them on TV, are going to say, "Hey, you were on TV, that's amazing," or "Good job in that video." And they get such positive feedback from it that they want to buy more product from you.
That's awesome.
But I do think if there's a way to convince people that, hopefully it doesn't take a lot of convincing because it's true, I think video has a much stronger potential to reach people in a very emotional way. I think it's a stronger storytelling tool than just audio or just print. Not every story needs to be video, but I think the video has a lot of emotional potential. We
have a YouTube comment from my Gmail. I was told that on my GH5 there is no crop in video mode, but when I switch from video to photo mode, and there's a crop. Can you explain, Griffin?
I can explain. So we're talking about two different things here. One, in photo mode, you're using the 4:3 full size of the sensor. The sensor is a 4:3 aspect ratio. And when you take a photo, you're using the entire thing. But that's taller than 16:9 video. So when you switch into video mode, you're still using the full width of the sensor on... which camera is he talking about? On the GH5, yeah.
GH5.
You're still using the full width of the sensor, but you're no longer using the top and bottom of the image. So you are cropping in vertically a little bit, and that's just normal going from those two different aspect ratios. What you've heard is that the GH5 doesn't have the same crop factor that the GH4 had. And what that's talking about is that on the GH4, when you shot 1080, you were still using the full width of the sensor, but when you shot 4K, it would actually crop in a little bit because it just made sense from a processing standpoint to use slightly fewer
pixels,
a smaller area of the sensor.
Yep.
And so they figured out how to get rid of that with the GH5. So now when you switch into 4K from 1080 or from photo mode, you're still using the same width. So that's what they mean by there's no additional crop factor.
And if you wanted to shoot some video that didn't have any of that crop change and you wanted to shoot 4:3, there's that new anamorphic mode, correct?
Right, yeah. You could shoot with that full 4:3 in the anamorphic mode that we talked about last week. And that's one reason that I shoot time lapses in 4:3, that I'd rather get the full sensor and decide later if I need to do some cropping. Now,
got a YouTube comment. Oh,
real
sorry.
quick, I will say that for those who do want the crop, because there are situations where you do want to punch in, the camera actually has a extended teleconversion mode where if you're shooting in 4K and you turn that on, it will jump into those middle 4,000 pixels. So you'll get an additional like 20% crop. And I used that when I was shooting bear stuff, when I was shooting wildlife. Sometimes I did want to punch in a little bit more because my lenses weren't quite tight enough.
Less light, though, obviously, right?
Yeah, I guess that would be slightly less light performance.
All right, now we've got a YouTube comment from Michael Simmons. Griffin, what mic are you using?
Well, right now on the podcast, I'm using, and Nick is also using, the Blue Baby Bottle, which is a studio microphone that we got specifically for this usage. But I imagine he might be asking about what I use for documentary stuff. Do you know which one?
Rode NTG something.
Yep, the Rode NTG 3.
Ah, yes.
You knew it. You said something, which is three somethings. So I know what you meant.
You cracked my code. Thank you.
Yeah, that's my favorite microphone for documentaries. But I'm the first to say that you don't need that microphone for documentaries. I also used to use the Azden SGM-1X, which is much cheaper. The SGM-1X was like a $150 microphone. The NTG3 that I use now is like a $700 microphone. And the difference is probably 5 to 10% improvement in dynamic range on the more expensive.
I seem to recall you doing a comparison video. Is that tickling the back of my brain?
Yeah. A few years ago, I did a comparison video between the two and found that only in a side-by-side test could I tell that I liked the more expensive mic more. But I really have to compare something back and forth, the exact same audio source with two different microphones to even tell that there's a difference. I think for most documentary work, you can get away with any mic as long as it's pretty close to the subject.
All right, we've got a YouTube comment from Matter Graphica for Mr. Griffin. Would you ever consider getting yourself an external recorder like the Atomos? Is that how you say that?
Atomos.
Shogun? Atomos. Shogun, the ones that have a monitor built in. He would like to hear your thoughts on external recorders, and are they a need or a want, especially for someone using a GH5 where you can shoot 4K 60p in body. So he's talking about a video recorder. When I hear external recorder, I'm always jump to an audio recorder, but he's asking about a video recorder here, is that right?
Yeah, he's talking about a device that would plug into the HDMI output on a camera, and it can record its own video, and it also acts as a monitor. And I will say that most of the features that the GH5 added over its predecessor, the GH4, all seem like they answer all the problems that a recorder answered. The reason people were getting recorders is so they could shoot higher bit rates. Now the GH5 can do 400 megabits per second. You could do better color subsampling by recording to an external recorder. And now you can do 10-bit 422 internal in the camera. You can do 4K 60 in the camera. You can load LUTs in the camera, which you could also do on a monitor or external recorder. I feel like a lot of the features they've added this time around are focused on that kind of professional filmmaker who wants to view those sorts of things and get that sort of quality. And now you don't necessarily need a recorder to do that. But you do get a monitor that's much bigger than what's built into the camera. So I still see a lot of people getting these recorders because not only do you get a much bigger view of your shot, but you could probably record in some formats that you wouldn't necessarily be able to record on the camera. Like, I think you could probably do ProRes on these things or some other high, I guess, easier to playback codecs for your computer.
Okay.
But you can imagine why I wouldn't really like an external recorder. I've never used one, but it just seems like it'd be adding an unnecessary amount of weight to my camera. I like to be really lightweight.
You are run and gun.
I am. So here's an email that we got for you, Nick. This is from Mike. And I read through this already. It's very technical. I don't know what all these words mean. But I'm going to read it to you.
Okay, read it to me. I'm ready.
Mike has a NAS, a network attached storage, with 5 8-terabyte Best Buy drives. I'm guessing those are the ones that you recommended buying, right?
Yeah, the ones you ripped out of the enclosures per my tutorial video.
Same drives.
Time out. Can I just say real quick? It's got a ton of views. I've got like 8,000 views. It's like my most popular video ever by far.
Nice.
I'm feeling very good about it. Let's check. Should we check the view count right now?
Let's go for it.
Can we get a live update?
Nick, this is what happens when you make passion projects. When you make things about the things you care about, people can tell.
I can't remember what my YouTube account is. That's not it.
Just search
That's my
Nick
wedding one.
Bodmer YouTube.
I think it's under... And I have 3. That's the problem. I have one for weddings, one that was like other real projects. I think this is under my Ampsonic one, which is... Yes, it is. 9.9 thousand. We are almost at 10K, Griffin.
Wow.
Almost. You've never had such success. Someday,
No, never.
Griffin, you'll get there like me. All right, continue.
All right,
so he's got a NAS, 5 8-terabyte drives in it. Good.
And then he says he has a second enclosure. He calls it a JBOD enclosure. Is that a brand?
Nope.
What does that
JBOD stands for just a bunch of discs.
Oh. What is the difference between that and a NAS?
We'll get there. Just keep going.
And in his JBOD, he has 14 terabytes of space. He says it's the drives that he swapped out of the NAS when he upgraded to these Best Buy drives. So the NAS is a Lacey Simple RAID, which he has set up as RAID 5. And it gets all of his files copied to it after he completes the project. The JBOD is RAID 0 spanning, and he'd like to find Mac software that can run to make sure that all the files that he puts on the NAS are automatically copied to the JBOD. He's been doing this manually on his own, and he says it takes forever, and he gets a lot of -50 errors. I don't know what that is.
Okay.
You know what a -50 error is?
Nope, but we're just going to assume it's some sort of copy error. I'm with that.
So he's wondering if you have any software recommendations that can handle that backup for both. He also says he hopes that's not too technical. It's too technical for me, definitely.
No, I love it. Okay, so in summary, he's basically got 2 different places he's storing footage. He's got a NAS full of space, and then he's got basically what's really just like a big external hard drive that plugs into his computer, but actually has multiple drives behind it.
Does that just act like, does your computer recognize that as one drive?
Yeah, it'd be like, remember those Pro Media enclosures we used to have with all those drives in them, and it would show up just like one big external hard drive?
Yeah.
It's like that.
Okay.
Now, if I'm getting technical, I might nitpick and say it can't be both a JBOD and a RAID 0 because of the way it works, but it's really unimportant to his question. So what he wants to do is sync the data that he copies from his NAS onto this external enclosure of disks. And I assume right now he's just copying them with Finder on his Mac and dragging and dropping, and he's getting errors because they're big copies and things like that. So what I would recommend is a tool called rsync. That's RSYNC, which is a very common Unix tool used for copying large amounts of data and verifying that the copy is correct. You know, it doesn't just copy it and hope for the best, but it validates every copy. It is a command line tool that can be kind of technical to use. So there is a GUI front end that I have used with success in the past, and it is called rsync, like a pirate. ARRYS. I can't spell. I got totally confused there.
You said GUI, and I think I know what that is. That's a graphical user interface.
Graphical user interface, yeah, exactly. So you can control this, you know, with clicking as opposed to having to type obscure commands. ARRSYNC, a Mac OS X front end for rsync.
Yeah.
Now, it may not do it automatically just every time it detects you plug in the drive, but at least you could set up a job that you just click one button and then it goes and takes care of doing a sync and finding any changes that have not been reflected on the target and making those changes moved over without having to recopy all the data. So that's what I would use.
And it can do that without running into the same errors that he's running into when he does it manually?
In theory. I mean, it depends why you're getting the errors. If it's because, you know, the JBOD box is actually throwing errors because there's problems with it, it's going to also have problems, but it will automatically attempt to correct them, and it won't, it won't just allow errors to persist and not at least tell you about it.
Yeah.
So,
is there a way or a different piece of software to check that, like, you would expect that over time, if you're copying to the NAS and it's supposed to copy everything to the JBOD, that these two things should have an identical database of files?
Yeah, it does that. That's part of rsync, is when you say synchronize these two things, it will check everything. It'll run checksums against all of the data.
Sure.
Find what is different and make those changes made. Make sure those changes are made.
Good job, Nick.
That's what I'd use.
Yeah.
We got a YouTube comment from David DeBlair?
Looks right.
Sorry, David. I'm not sure which of those is right. He says, "You seem like such a nice guy. Do you ever get mad?" I assume they're talking about you, since you're the nice one.
Yeah. Well, I think this was on my last YouTube video. Thank you, David. I do like to try to be a nice guy. But, Nick, do you know I get mad sometimes?
Yeah, but you are very conscientious and you never take it out on others.
Or at least not for a long time.
Yeah, well, we've known each other a really long time, so I'm sure there are some times when we could say some bad things about each other, but we won't do that.
I feel like the only time I really get frustrated, like when I really feel angry, is when a computer is not doing what I want it to do. I feel like I always get angrier at computers than I do at people.
Yeah. And in the end, it's probably your fault.
Yeah. I just want the computer to do what I need it to do right now.
When you're always up against deadlines and working super late on things, and when things don't go well there, that can be very frustrating.
Yeah. But generally, I try not to worry about things I can't control and live a pretty optimistic, happy life.
Griffin is surprisingly positive. It's not just for show on his videos. He's pretty much acts the way you see here.
Well, that's it for us this week. We have several things that we will put in the show notes this week for you, including
yes, we do.
The software that you just talked about, rsync. And I do want to make sure that you should all check out John Luna's YouTube channel. He's the guy I was talking about who has helped on the podcast. He helped on my last video, which I will also put in the show notes, my video about the SpiderLight holster. And I should put my my bear video that finally came out in the show notes about photographer Dan Cox.
And you should put my tutorial video again in the show notes, and let's get me over that 10K hump, huh?
Yeah.
Let's go watch that video.
It'll be a call to action. Click here to help Nick get over 10K.
We're almost there, folks. Won't take much.
Well, thanks everyone for watching and listening. This has been episode 37 of the Hey Indie Filmmakers podcast.
Wow. Can you believe it? All right, my friend Griffin, we will talk to you later.
See ya. Bye.
Bye-bye. Can
Hello,
I do it
Nick.
again?
Oh, what'd you say?
Can I do it again?
Yeah.
I didn't like it.
I thought that was good. But we can
Oh,
do
do
that
you?
whole. Yeah, let's do the whole intro again.
Maybe you'll be. All right.
Maybe I'll use it. Yeah.